Okay, so the reason why I want to talk to you today is to discuss the spiritual implications of what's happening on our world today. And we are in a time of incredible change. You may be experiencing a great deal of personal hardship in your own life. You may be going through real hardship. And actually, that's not a bad thing. When we really get into this cosmic model of the universe that I've been looking at, this whole process of suffering is seen as an opportunity. We have the opportunity to go through these horrible events in our lives. We have the opportunity to suffer, the opportunity for depression. In fact, if you go back to the ancient mystery school teachings, they deliberately would try to cultivate a state called melancholia, in which they were unhappy because they believed that from that state of melancholia, melancholy means sadness, that you would be able to access spiritual truth, spiritual knowledge much better. Another really interesting thing that I saw from the book Rainbow Painting by Tulku Urkyan Rinpoche was this idea that the closest you're ever going to get to Buddha consciousness, which again is just another name for the One Infinite Creator and its awareness, the closest you're ever going to get to Buddha consciousness is when you're on the run from a pack of wild dogs that are trying to rip you apart. Isn't that something? So, there is a deeper context to the reality of our daily lives that many people are starting to understand. And you may be one of those people who really is starting to awaken. And what does an awakening really mean? It means that the conventional reality that most people take for granted has cracks. There's flaws in the design. You're not necessarily believing what the mainstream view of reality would be. When you start to have paranormal experiences, bizarre things like what Dr. Carl Jung called synchronicity, seemingly unrelated correspondences between events, where something happens to you that appears to be in the outside world, but it's also a reflection of your inner world. Now, one of the most common examples of this that would happen for me is I would see a repeating set of digits on the clock, or I would see it on my odometer, or I would see it on a license plate, right as I'm having a very unique thought. Now, you have to understand, at that point, I was in college. This is when it really started to happen. I'd be reading my book. I'd be reading something about ancient civilizations, Bigfoot, pyramids, Stonehenge, Atlantis, whatever. I'd be reading the book, and after not looking at the clock for like 2 hours and just being very engrossed in what I'm doing, I'd look at the clock and it would say 3:33. Oh, that doesn't mean anything. Okay, but it happened like every time. And it would, like, I'd get the urge to look at the clock, and there it is, 3:33, or 11:11, or 4:44. I wake up in the middle of the night. I have a digital clock. I look at the clock. There it is. Then you're driving your car, and you see it on the clock, and then you see it on the odometer. You get a bank of digits on your odometer. And in fact, it's so ironic, this happened last night. I pulled in from going out at a random trip, and my little 3-digit gas meter was at 800.0. That's because I don't hit the trip thing when I fill up the gas tank. I just let it run. Down to the 10th of a mile, it was at 8000, right as I pull into my parking spot here. So that's one thing. That's an interesting thing. But some people are having really profound, paradigm-shattering experiences. You may have seen something that you can't explain. You might have seen light. You might have seen a ghost. You might have seen an unidentified flying object. You might have had a very, very powerful dream that seemed like it was more than a dream. You may have had an out-of-body experience. Many people have had near-death experiences in which the body is actually clinically dead, which means three things. You have cessation of heartbeat, cessation of breathing, and cessation of brainwave activity. And yet, in that clinically dead state, you have awareness, And there's a widespread consensus of what people experience in the near-death experience. Science would tell you that your brain is dead, your body is dead, your brain doesn't have any electrical activity. If your consciousness is only electrical activity in the brain, then therefore you shouldn't be alive, you shouldn't be aware. But there are many reports of people seeing what's going on in the operating room. Even one case of a guy flying out from the building that he was in, flying above the building, looking down on the ceiling, and there it was, a sneaker on the roof. Nobody knew that sneaker was there, but he said it when he got resuscitated. They go up there, and sure enough, the sneaker was exactly where he said it would be. It was the exact same shape. And it isn't like there's just a few of these. There's hundreds and hundreds of great near-death experience stories like this. So that's where reality starts to crack. That's where you start to understand that you're in a living universe. This universe that we live in is not just a product of dumb matter that's not really doing its thing beyond the typical Cartesian model of materialistic duality, in which you go to church on Sunday and you pray to God, but then during the week you're a scientist who's debunking the idea that there is such a thing. What I've been able to do in my work, and this is now 3 published books, we have Source Field Investigations, Synchronicity Key, and Ascension Mysteries, is I've gotten into the science of the living cosmos, the alive universe model. Yeah, you can put that down now. Beth is being very nice in terms of shoving the cue card in my face to make sure that we hit the talking points that we had agreed on, because part of the idea is I don't want to ramble for a long time. I want to keep this fairly tight and concise, but I also want to get through some substantive discussion with you. So the living universe is very, very important to what we're talking about. Now, it's a typical view in our mainstream reality that we're getting errors.
Yeah, I got I don't even see the screen now.
Yeah.
Did it collapse?
It might come and go, so we're going to see what happens here.
Are we actually live? Are we actually streaming?
Well, I have a black no, I see you now.
Okay.
I see you.
Okay, we're sorry about this. This is probably some kind of, yeah, I know you're probably going to laugh. Some of you will laugh, but we are probably being attacked. Our bandwidth is being attacked. This is a predictable event. We are on a shared internet trunk line, so it would make sense that our enemies would try to disrupt this broadcast, especially because we, did it in advance. We told you this was going to happen in advance. So I will just keep talking, and hopefully if there are gaps in this, you'll still get the gist of what I'm trying to say.
I see you.
Are we live now?
I see you. I don't see the chat. That's right.
I see both.
Okay. Maybe because you're both confidence monitoring, we got too many people pulling on our bandwidth. We should probably, you should probably sit with him, and just because then we're not having as much bandwidth problem.
All right.
Yeah, just shut the thing. Do I look good? Everything's okay? I'm sorry, folks. This is new for us, and
Somebody said you've been live all along.
okay. So there's staggering complexity in trying to get this to work, where you have 3 camera angles, we have the audio, everything has to work. We worked on lighting, we worked on everything. So, and then I have all these other distractions and all this chaos in my life, and that's the joy of the dance, right? Everything is converging, everything's happening all at once. So we keep rolling, and let's just try to get back on track. My hope is that this will be more professional in the future. Yeah, I know the cue cards. Thank you very much. That's so generous of you to hold paper up in my face while I'm talking. So we're talking about the living universe. Now, this is a very, very significant point. There is a whole branch of Russian science that they've had over 40,000 published papers that was secret, classified for national security up until the fall of their Iron Curtain in 1991. In the aftermath of that collapse, you have the communist system in which people are being paid as scientists whatever it was, $30 a month equivalent, which is good for them. But now there's no war to fight, there's no national security. So they could declassify the things that they were working on and bring them out to the public. Part of what was classified was the work of Dr. Nikolai Kozyrev. And Kozyrev is an amazing character because he was involved in the concentration camp, actually. Stalin put him in a concentration camp. You may not be aware that scientists were rounded up because the communists were worried that scientists could have critical thinking and outmaneuver their political machinations. So if you were a scientist, you were literally targeted for being put in a concentration camp. Kozyrev he was the first person actually to ever suggest that we might find water ice on the moon, that we could mine the ice for water and then use that for colonization of a lunar colony. He was doing great, and then he gets in the concentration camp and his life turns to hell, and they're fighting over literally eating starch, like liquid starch that has no flavor in it, that kind of stuff. It's just horrible existence. So interestingly enough, if you go back through all the literature about various spiritual traditions, when people go through extreme adversity, sometimes they get unbelievable powers that happen. And this is why if you look at like a book like China's Super Psychics by Paul Dong, he's showing you people from the hardest hit, most poor parts of China who are doing incredible things. Kids who can take a bottle of pills and teleport the pills out of the bottle. They're just holding it in their hand. There's pills inside the glass. No sleight of hand, no trickery. They hold it in their hand, and the pill just falls out onto the table. And they've even done interesting things. Some of these kids were actually able to teleport larger objects in and out of an enclosure. And one of these objects had a beeper on it, and what they found was that the timing of the beep changed as the beeper was teleported. In other words, the beeper's going at a set speed, and as the teleportation starts to occur, as the beeper becomes partially invisible and then completely invisible, the beep gets slower and slower and slower. So there's some relationship between the time factor and the materialization factor. So this is one of the things that Dr. Nikolai Kozyrev ultimately discovered. And this is where, for me, it got very confusing because he called this new energy field that he found the waves of time. Now, what am I saying here? I'm saying that Kozyrev discovered that time was not locally invariant, unlike what Einstein says. In Einstein's model of physics, the only way that you're going to get time to dilate or change is by accelerating your whole frame of reference, like if you're in a spaceship and you go towards light speed, right? Then the idea is time's moving a lot faster for you inside that ship. This is the classic relativity paradox. Your time is going faster. You come back to Earth after 10 minutes, it's been 500 years, whatever the math is. And then, as you may know if you've read my books, Einstein's model was actually verified when you had atomic clocks flown in high-flying jet airplanes at a high-speed supersonic aircraft, and sure enough, based on the exact relativistic time dilation, time moved slightly differently for those clocks in the planes than it did on Earth. So the faster you move through space, the more time is actually speeding up for you so that you experience less duration compared to everybody else. So you might think it's only 10 minutes, but for them it's 10 years or longer. You only get a very subtle amount of this when you're in a plane. Okay, it's not like it's going to be very much, but they could measure it with these atomic clocks. So this is where it gets really cool and weird. Dr. Nikolai Kozyrev is discovering that Einstein was wrong. Oh my God, heaven forbid, right? He's supposed to be like your scientific savior. That's what a lot of people, there's almost like a worship of Einstein in some sense. So when you're not actually dealing in relativity anymore, but you're dealing in torsion physics, as they call it, this is the Russian science, time can be changed in the lab. You can alter the speed that a watch or an atomic clock or any other type of scaled time measurement system works. And then what's also weird is that in addition to changing the flow of time, it can be measured. There were different ways that these waves could be measured. You could measure these time waves, as he called them, with the mercury level in a thermometer. You have an isolated thermometer in which there's no other temperature fluctuations, but then by simply beaming these waves in, the mercury goes up or down. But there's no actual temperature change. And then there's other things that he was able to do, various other methods of how to get these waves detectable. So, what are these waves? How are they generated? Interestingly enough, he found out that a wave would be created when, for example, you go from liquid water to a solid, if it freezes to ice, a phase transition, or if you get liquid water to boiling water, you would get this noticeable change. Now, let me just describe to you another one of the ways that he was able to detect these waves. There's something very subtle about the wave, about the way it works. It's actually ultimately, and in the source field investigations book, I go into this in great length, it is a twist in gravity. Now, that's very important because, wait a minute, David, you said it was time. Yes. Time ultimately appears to be a function of gravity. Time is gravity powered. And then the really crazy part is that consciousness is gravity powered, but we'll get to that in a second. So, when we have various things like phase transitions, or if you break an object, or even he had some cases where he would shake a weight up and down, you could measure these waves. One of the ways he measured a wave was with an asymmetrical balance beam. It's got 10 grams of weight on one side, 1 gram on the other side. Obviously, this side's heavier. So in order to get it to be a straight line, you have to hang the string way over towards the side that's heavier. Okay? You hang that string, you got the heavier side, the lighter side, and it's balanced perfectly. And then the last step was that you had to vibrate the top of the string. You had to have a high-level vibration there so that the pendulum stops moving, but that there's actually a lot of vibration in the string. Now, for some reason, when you do this, and then you have, let's say it's sealed inside a glass container, there's no air resistance going into it, the air inside is constant. And then outside, even like 10 feet away, you start shaking a weight up and down, and the weight, believe it or not, creates a wave that then makes the pendulum move. This balance beam moves, and it points towards where the source of the wave is. Now, this is crazy enough, but again, he discovered that there were different ways to generate these waves. Phase transitions, plants that are dying, the waves change from day to night. There are certain parts of the day where they get stronger and weaker. None of this known to Western science. And again, anybody who's trying to cross their arms or say this is BS, there's 40,000 published papers on torsion fields. And then after the fall of the Iron Curtain, yeah, I know, thank you. It's good, please. 40,000 papers published from the former Soviet Union that are now public domain, and I went through all of them in the late 1990s. It was an incredible, incredible process for me. An enormous learning curve. There's a lot of things to learn here. So if somebody's just trying to say, oh, this is all BS, David's making this up, this is pseudoscience, this was the highest level scientific institutions in Russia. This was multiple people studying this, multiple institutions, and it was classified for national security. Now, why might it be classified for national security? Well, this gets into something really interesting that happened. You going to follow me there? All right, great. This gets into something interesting that happened with Dr. Nikolai Kozyrev. And I love this part of the story because remember, he's got the balance beam and he can burn something and then it points towards the burning. He can freeze something, it points towards the freezing. He can break something, but there's no air, there's no vibration, normal vibration that would cause this. One day, he had the thing sitting there, and he's reading his book on the temptation of Faust by Mephistopheles, the classic book about being tempted by the devil. And of course, if you'd grown up in the concentration camps, that could happen to you. You could end up being tempted to do things that are self-serving and destructive. At that moment where Faust accepted the temptation from Mephistopheles, he has this huge emotional surge, a very powerful biological response. His whole body goes into fight or flight. And at that moment, the needle pointed towards him, showing the possibility of a connection with his consciousness to the waves. The consciousness creates the waves. And they've done many other studies since then confirming that our mind can create the wave. So this is a very interesting thing because it suggests the possibility that consciousness is not local to your brain, that it's an emergent phenomenon that ripples out into the world. And there are some really cool studies that have been done on this stuff. One is Dr. William Broad, who actually looked at the science of being stared at. And it turns out that if you're sitting in a lab and there's a hidden camera in the room, you don't even know it's there, and somebody stares at you through another camera in another room, even if you're not consciously aware that they're staring at you, during the times they stare at you, your physiological activity in your body goes way up. You start having noticeable change in your skin conductivity. The galvanic skin response, or GSR, actually changes, which means you're sweating a little bit more and a little more electricity conducts through your skin. Well, how weird is that? They've been able to prove that when you are being stared at, that your body knows. Even if it's in a different room and you're only being stared at through closed circuit television on a hidden camera that you don't even know about. Then the question becomes, well, does the conscious mind recognize that it's actually being stared at or not? Most of us probably know, but then there's always been those cases where you feel that. It's like, somebody's looking, somebody's looking. So that's okay. It's okay to understand that the science has already been done. The results are in. Skeptics are not looking at all the evidence. It's that the science doesn't get publicity. That's the really important part. We have the data, we know it's good, we know it's real, but it's not getting publicized. That's the whole problem.